So we started discussing the basic cache optimizations in the last class, and so we discussed these three to which reduce the miss rate, which is increasing block size, increasing cache size, and increasing set associativity. Right? So, but when we increase these, one, they have the effect, block size and set associativity actually have the effect that as you increase the size or the associativity, the miss rate reduces and then starts increasing. So, we should always choose a level where the miss rate is actually less. So that's one thing. Second thing is that all these optimizations have effect on more than one of the parameters. So block size, while it reduces miss rate, increases miss penalty because you have to bring in more data whenever there is a miss. So if you have issued a read and you're waiting for it because it is a miss, if you have a large block size, then the miss penalty will be high. So, we need to balance all these parameters because of that. We finished this and we started discussing basically in the last class about multi-level caches, right? And when we use multi-level caches, the average memory access time, the equation changes in this fashion. The hit time will, and all that, all those parameters will be of L1 cache. But the miss penalty of the L1 cache is equal to the hit time of the L2 cache plus miss rate of L2 cache into miss penalty of L2 cache. Now, if you have a third level cache, the miss penalty of L2 cache will be equal to hit time of L3 plus miss rate of L3 into miss penalty of L3. Possibly, and most of the times after the level 3 cache, we have the main memory. So at that point, the miss penalty of L3 will be equal to the memory access time, the main memory access time. So it stops there, but we need to then try to understand what are the properties you would like to have for L1 caches and the properties we need to have for the L2 caches, which we also discussed in the last class. We said that we would like to have a high, low hit time, so a fast cache at level 1, and also its miss penalty should be less. Whereas when you talk about level 2 cache, the rate should be less because every time you hit a miss there, you have a miss in the L2 cache, you have to go to the main memory assuming there is no L3 cache. So you want to reduce the miss rate at the level 2. How does it help? Because also the number of accesses which go to L2 are not many, because we expect that most of the accesses will have a hit in level 1 cache. So if you have as few misses as possible in L2 cache, then your miss penalty at L2 level will be reduced. Overall average memory access time will be reduced. So that is basically the logic behind saying that this is what we want. There are other properties also, but this is the main requirement. Okay, I should say maybe requirement rather than properties. So in going further, this is where we have to start today's class. So I see only 13 students are there because I think Rukma and I are there. So there is this concept of local miss rate and global miss rate. Anyone who has seen Bhaskar and Raman's third video would have come across this, right? That you have these different terms. Basically, the local miss rate is the number of misses per memory accesses to that particular cache. Okay. Whereas the global miss rate is the number of misses for all the memory accesses that the processor has made. So example would be, if there are 30 misses per 1000 accesses in level 1 cache, so you always go to the level 1 cache, then if there is a miss, then you go to the level 2 cache. So if there are 1000 accesses from the processor, all 1000 of them will hit the L1 cache, okay? And whatever is a miss in the L1 cache will go to the L2 cache. So local and global miss rates are the same for the level 1 cache, because the number of accesses to the cache, number of overall memory accesses, both are same. But when you come to the level 2 cache, if out of 30 misses in the L1 cache, okay, so there are 30 misses in the L1 cache, as we said, only these 30 accesses will come to the L2 cache, because all the others were a hit in the L1 cache. Out of these 30 accesses for the L2 cache, if there are 10 misses, then the local miss rate will be basically 10 out of 30. So which is basically like 33% miss rate. But in actuality, 10 out of 1000 accesses have missed in the L2, because we assume that whatever is in L1 is also in L2. Okay. So the actual miss rate at L2 is only 10 out of 1000 accesses, which is 1% miss rate. That is, more it reflects more the actual miss rate at level 2 rather than the local miss rate. So we need to distinguish between these two. Any questions on that? Okay, so I have left these things to be. The properties of the L2 cache, I want a discussion from you people. So I don't have the slide filled in straight away. We fill in as we go forward. So what do you expect about the size of the L2 cache? And especially in the context of, how do you compare it with L1 cache also? So if you are looking at the size of the L1 cache, size of the L2 cache, what would be the relationship between them? And then, how large would you expect the size of L2 cache to be? I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about, the property of it, because that determines, how it reacts. And we have already discussed about what we want. We want good hit time and less miss penalty in L1, and we want less miss rate in L2. These are the requirements, because that would actually reduce the average memory access time. So based on that, how much, how big should the L2 cache be? And what in comparison with L1 on its own also?
L2 must be bigger than L1, I guess.
Hey, who is that? Vaishnavi, yeah?
Srijam.
Srijam, okay. Yeah, it should be bigger than L1 without any doubt. And Krishna says 1.5 to 2 times the size of L1. Essentially, does it mean that it should be much bigger than L1? And if so, why? Why should it be much bigger than L1? Okay, I am putting up this thing that size should be much bigger. The hit time is, yeah, of course. So to, the hit time of L2 is obviously going to contribute to the miss penalty of L1. And therefore, we would like it to be small, but more importantly, miss rate has to be lower, right? Because if there is a miss in L2, then the miss penalty of L1 is going to be extremely large because you're going to go to the main memory. Therefore, to reduce the miss rate, you would like to have a larger cache. Okay, because the hit time is not as much affected by a large cache as miss penalty is affected if you have to go to the main memory. Okay, so therefore it is better to have a large S2 L2 cache. And okay, there are more questions coming up. We'll discuss further on that also. So what about associativity? Should it be high or low? And also contrast L1 and L2 caches. What would you like the associativity to be in L1 cache? How would you like to see it in L2 cache and why? Even if we have an L3 cache, at every level, so the caches as you go farther and farther away from the processor become larger and larger and also less costlier because the memory mechanisms that they use will become less costly. So you can actually buy larger values, but miss penalty keeps increasing. Okay, so you have the fastest access time at the L1 cache, but it's the costliest. So therefore, you can't afford to have too large uh, L1 cache. In addition to, of course, having other issues like power consumption is one. The second is hit time will increase and so on. But L2 will be bigger and less costlier. L3 will be even bigger and even less costlier. And main memory will be obviously very large nowadays. But the problem is that the gap between the processor speed and the main memory speed has been increasing. The processors are becoming faster and faster. Memory is not becoming faster as you know quickly as that. So the gap has increased, which is why you're forced to use multi-level caching to bridge this gap between the main memory and processor. I hope that answered your question. So coming to associativity, what is your take on that? L1 versus L2 and why? So what do we know about associativity? What did I say in the last class about increasing associativity? L1 should have low associativity so that it has less hit time, and L2 should have high associativity to have low miss rate. Exactly. Because we have already said what are the requirements. The requirements are good hit time for L1 and low miss rate for L2. We know that as you increase associativity, your hit time increases, miss rate decreases. Therefore, for L1, use a low associativity, and for L2, use a higher associativity. Okay, makes sense, right? Okay, what about block size? Now, the question here is, we have L1 cache, which is small. We have an L2 cache, which is large, as we have discussed just now. So, we also know that the large block size reduces miss rate. We have discussed that also, right? So, what the point is, should we use a small block size, large block size, or should it be independent of the cache size and be uniform across all levels of caches? What issues will we hit? And I want more participation. Come on, please talk. Because these are not something you can't, reason from first principles. You can. They are not something that should be learned by heart. And if you learn by heart, you will forget them because you really don't understand why you're doing what you're doing or why something is being used. But if you reason from first principles, you shouldn't forget it, or at least you should be able to from principles if somebody asks you a question. If you learn by heart, you will forget after a while, and somebody asks you that you can't recall because you have never reasoned out the answer, right? So let me just take the whiteboard. I have a level 1 cache. I have a level 2 cache. Okay. So now give me some, numbers, okay, for the sizes of the caches. Okay, 64 KB. What about L2? Okay, what about block size? What block size would you like? I'm showing very few blocks actually here. So if we have to go by my, whatever, 64 anyway can't be divided by 3, but well, I would make it 4, then each will be basically 16 KB, right? Okay, so what I want to do is let's maybe take smaller numbers for the caches so that we can discuss more easily. Let us say this is 64 bytes instead of 64 kilobytes. Okay. And where is 1 to 8 bytes. So here I'm making the block size, okay. So if I make block size equal to 16 bytes, I have four such blocks in L1, right? And 8 such blocks in L2. So this is assuming equal blocks across the caches. Now, what happens if L2 cache has a block size of 32 bytes? Why would you have a block size of 32 bytes in L2 and not 16, for example? Okay, there is special locality of reference. But what did we say when we increase the block size? What happens?
If we
Yes,
increase block
so it will
size,
lead to lower miss rate, no doubt about that. Okay. Now, do you want it or do you like it or do you don't? Having an L2 cache block size is bigger, leads to lower miss rate. Is that good or not?
it's not good, ma'am.
Why?
Like it increases miss penalty if the block size is more.
No, we said it lowers miss rate.
But if we don't account for spatial locality, the number of misses will increase. Like number of misses from L2 cache will increase.
No, wait, you're not hearing what we have said. We said that a larger block size will mean lower miss rate. So obviously miss penalty cannot increase because you are going to go to the main memory less often. Think about conflicts, okay? Supposing you have to replace, so instead of having, so many blocks, you're going to have, even here you're going to have only 4 blocks. But each of those blocks is going to be twice as big as the size of the block in L1. Now, I think a lot of thinking needs to be done by you people, which I'm not able to make you do because we are not together. What happens if, let us say, you want to replace a block here, right? So let's say that we have blocks A, B, C, and D here, okay? So if, so what will happen here? If A block has to be in L1 cache, what will be how do you handle? No, we are basically, okay, let me just again reiterate what I'm saying. The block size is now 16 bytes in L1,
32
right?
bytes.
And 32 bytes in L2, right? So it is L1. Okay, let's be very clear about that. So when we move up, what happens? Processor says, I want this word. Okay, that's a miss in L1. So let's say it is a miss in L2 also. Let's talk about the, starting off of the execution. Okay. So now you go to the main memory and you have to fetch into L1. You have to fetch into L2 cache. L2 cache fetches 32 bytes at a time. Okay, because that is its block size. It will fetch 32 bytes. And then it has to be copied, but L1 cache has a 16 byte block size. So what will you have to do?
You have to.
It'll be something like you have A1 here and A2 here. Sorry. I know people are saying, many of you, that you have some issues with audio. So people who have issues with audio can use the chat, others can talk. I think that'll be good. So, you have this two blocks of L1 have to be moved from L2 to L1. There is no other way, because it is basically one block you can move out of L2, but it will occupy two blocks in L1. Okay, so that's basically what's going to happen. Now you talk about replacement. What's going to happen? Tell me. Supposing, there is a conflict and, you get basically E here. Then what do you do? Supposing your requirement is whatever is there in L1, whatever is there in L2 should also be in L1. You cannot have data in L1 which is not there in L2. Supposing you have such a requirement. Should you have, should you not have? We'll discuss that. Supposing you have such a requirement and there is a conflict, A is replaced by E, what will happen? And since Bansi is telling us that there isn't much time left, my suggestion is, keep thinking. Whoever has the answer can say that, but when we get cut, we can always take a 5-minute break, come back, and you can tell me hopefully more answers after thinking. There are many options. So, there are many algorithms here and you need to complete the report.
Maybe you can take it again to L2 from minimum.
I'm awfully sorry. I'm not able to make out what you're saying. So, I think it's Tarak, right?
Gayatri, ma'am.
Okay. I think whoever it is can send a chat. So, I in fact raised one answer saying it should be present in both L1 and L2. No, when there is a miss in L1, okay, this is how it works. I want you to be very clear about how multi-level caches work. Your processor is requesting for a word. It goes to L1 cache. If there is a miss, it will go to L2 cache. If there is a miss, then it will go to the main memory. We are assuming there are only two levels of caches at this point, right? So it will then fetch from the main memory into L2 and also into L1 from L2. Okay. That, of course, the next